This is the Ready for Takeoff podcast, episode 552. My name is George Nolly, and today we're going to visit with Hamfist Meets His Soulmate. But first, I'd like to apologize for the last two episodes' audio quality. I listened to them after they were released, and I heard a really loud hiss in the background. And I'm really ashamed of that audio quality. And to be honest with you, when I was recording it, I didn't hear that hiss because I hear that hiss all the time. I have what's called tinnitus, and I always hear a hissing sound just like what was in the background. So now you know what it's like to have tinnitus. So I'm going to pay special attention to the audio quality from now on. As you know, the Hamfist Over the Trail audiobook is a free download, and what I want to do for this holiday week is to give you a free sample of a portion, my favorite portion of the audiobook, and it's the portion I call Hamfist Meets His Soulmate. But right now, fasten your seatbelts and get ready for takeoff. So before we begin, I want to give our condolences to the entire family at Colorado Fire. You may have listened to podcast episode 516, where we talked to the owner of Colorado Fire, where they do firefighting with single engine air tankers, and they do it in the daytime and at night using night vision goggles. And very recently, just last week, one of their pilots crashed during a night firefighting delivery. So our thoughts and prayers go out to Colorado Fire. So here is the portion from Hamfist Over the Trail.
I got the best BDA this squadron's seen in months. Lieutenant, he came back. I knew he was probably in trouble when he didn't call me Hamfist. That's commendable, but there isn't a target in all of Steel Tiger that's worth your life or another one of my airplanes. You weren't on a SAR. You didn't have TIC. It was just a goddamn truck park. You probably wiped out a dozen Gomers and that Quad 23. Good for you. Tomorrow, Uncle Ho will send down a dozen more, along with a new gunner. You're taking stupid risks, and I won't have it. Pack your bags, Lieutenant. You're out of here. I was shocked. What? I yelled. Sir, you're kicking me out of the squadron? No such luck, Hamfist, he answered. You're leaving for R&R tomorrow. Chapter 37. July 23, 1969. The ops officer, Major Walters, had made a wise decision to send me on R&R immediately. If I had been allowed to continue flying combat for another 2 weeks until my scheduled departure, there was no telling if I ever would have lasted. I had gotten what the fighter jocks called target fixation, where they would be on a bombing run and trying so hard to meet the parameters for a good delivery, they would lose awareness of their altitude and end up auguring in. I had seen that firsthand a few weeks earlier, and the horrific sight will forever be burned into my memory. I was controlling a flight of two F-4s from Da Nang, Gunfighter 5.5 and 5.6, on a truck park one night. It was a low-threat area, and I wasn't all that concerned about enemy reaction. I'd gone Christmas tree for an extended period of time, and hardly even drew any small arms fire. This was going to be easy. Gunfighter 5.5 put his bombs right on target, and we got a few small secondaries. Then Gunfighter 5.6 rolled in. Shortly after he called rolling in, there was a terrific fireball right on the target. I figured his bombs must have hit something really lucrative to get that big a secondary. That's beautiful, I transmitted. Lead came back. Negative, Covey. That was my wingman. The guy had flown right into the ground. We stuck around the area for over an hour to see if maybe he had punched out and would come up on the radio. No such luck. I did a lot of soul searching to see if there was anything I could have done to have prevented the tragedy. No, I gave a good target briefing. I provided the correct target elevation. I gave a good mark and a good run-in line. The guy had probably simply gotten target fixation. It can happen to the best of pilots. The last thing I did before I got on the Freedom Bird to Tokyo was change my MPC into US dollars. We weren't allowed to have US currency in Vietnam because, they said, it could lead to black marketeering. So all US forces were paid in military payment certificates, basically monopoly money. periodically, everyone would have to turn in their MPC to exchange it for new, different MPC. This supposedly kept MPC out of the hands of the locals, since they never knew when the money would be changed. To be honest, I never really totally understood the whole MPC thing. But finally, I was getting my hands on some good old greenbacks. It was a late-night departure, and I slept the entire flight, probably 5 or 6 hours. I arrived at Yokota Air Base at 0700 hours. I wasn't sure if I should call Tom so early, but he said to call him any time. I found a payphone in the terminal and dialed the number on his Meishi. A female with an accent answered. All American Importer-Exporter, Mr. Marcos' office. Hi, this is Hamilton Hancock calling for Mr. Marcos. I'd almost called myself Hamfist. After a short pause, Tom was on the phone. Ham, great to hear from you. When are you coming to Tokyo? Hi, Tom. Actually, I'm already here. I'm at Yokota Air Base. Yokota Air Base, he repeated. Okay. He paused. It will take my driver about an hour to get there. He'll meet you at the main gate in an hour. Is that okay? Sure, great. How will I know your driver? He'll have a sign with your name. Damn, I'm really glad you're here. And your timing is perfect. If you had come 2 days earlier, you would have missed us. We just came back from Boston. I'll see you soon. I was actually glad to have an hour to decompress. Yokota Air Base was like being back in the States. They had a great BX right in the terminal. There was a snack bar that actually had lemons in the iced tea. And most important, nobody was lobbing rockets at us. I checked at the information booth to find out how to get to the main gate, and they pointed me to a line of taxis right outside the door. Now this was civilization. I showed up at the main gate, and there was a blacked-out limo parked at the curb. A young Japanese man was holding a sign with my name. Welcome to Japan, he intoned with a rather thick accent. First we measure. From seemingly out of nowhere, an older Japanese gentleman in a suit appeared and started taking my measurements. He must have measured me 50 different ways: my neck, my chest, my arms, my wrists, my inseam, you name it. He was rapidly speaking to a cute young Japanese girl who was furiously writing down everything he said. It probably took about 5 minutes. Then the driver opened the door for me, and we were on our way. The limo was decidedly different from Tom's limo in San Francisco. The car was obviously Japanese, with the driver sitting on the right. The seats were velour, and the headrests had white cloth doilies covering them. The air conditioning was on. Temperature okay? Too hot? Too cold? The driver inquired. It good, I responded, not realizing that I was again using pidgin English. You want to drink? He offered. When I said yes, thank you, he handed me an ice-cold beverage bottle. I looked at it. The label said Cal Piss. It kind of looked like cow piss, but I sure wasn't going to insult the driver, so I took a sip. Then another. It tasted great. Tokyo was a study in contrasts. The city was totally modern. It could have been New York or Chicago. But then I'd see women wearing kimonos, carrying brightly colored paper umbrellas, walking with men wearing business suits. It was hard to believe that this place had been bombed to the ground just 25 years earlier. I wondered if Vietnam would recover as quickly once the war was over. Chapter 38. July 23, 1969. Tom was waiting at the curb when we arrived outside his office. I got out of the car and went to shake his hand, but he'd have none of that. He went for the big hug. I'm afraid I still smell like Vietnam, I ventured. No problem. We'll take you to my place and you can freshen up. The tailor should be ready for your first fitting after you clean up. I wasn't really sure how to respond. We both got back into the limo and we drove to Tom's apartment. Tom had a nice townhouse within view of Tokyo Tower. The American Embassy is not very far, he offered, pointing toward the tower. The one thing I'll ask you to do, he said as we entered, is remove your shoes. Then he paused. You look like you could use some new shoes. What size are you? I looked down at my shoes and was immediately chagrined. I still had the muck of Vietnam on my soles. Why hadn't I used my hour at Yokota to make myself presentable? I think I'm a size 10. No sweat, he replied. Same as me. We'll find you something. It was a really nice apartment. There was a modern living room with a couch and 2 easy chairs, a kitchen, and 3 bedrooms. The bedrooms had straw mats covering the entire floor, and the mattresses were directly on the floor. "These are tatami mats," he explained. "You'll love sleeping on a mattress on the floor. You'll see." "I'm looking forward to it," I responded. I'd slept in a thicket in the jungle, in a room underneath an artillery range, and in a hooch with the air conditioner being knocked out of the wall. I figured I could sleep on a mattress on the floor. Tom pointed to a separate room with a translucent sliding door. "You can take a shower here." "Good," I responded. "I need to use the bathroom." "Not in there, I hope," Tom replied. "I think you mean you need to use the toilet. In Japan, the bathroom is where you take a bath or shower, and the toilet is in a different part of the house." Tom showed me the toilet, and then I went to the bathroom to take a shower. Now, that would take some getting used to. The shower was different from anything I had seen in the States. As soon as I selected hot water, a gas burner ignited and the water was instantly hot. When I finished the shower, the burner turned off. There was a white terry cloth robe waiting for me when I finished, and I felt really refreshed. I had been living in the most civilized hooch in Vietnam, but the showers there were nothing compared to this. When I emerged from the bathroom, the older gentleman who had measured me at the main gate of Yokota was waiting in the living room, holding a dark blue suit. It wasn't really a suit yet. It was what looked like pieces of a suit held together with thin white thread. "We do fast fitting now," he said in a thick accent. I changed into my underwear and carefully put on the suit jacket, and he started making minuscule adjustments, moving the material a few millimeters here, a few there, and pinning the material in place. Then I put on the pants and went through the same process. Then I returned the pants to the tailor. He spoke a few words to Tom in Japanese. "Do you want single vent or double vent?" Tom asked. "Single vent." "Pleats or no pleats?" Tom continued. I really hadn't given it any thought. "What do you think?" I responded. Tom spoke in Japanese again, and the tailor left with the suit. "We're going for no pleats, single vent, single breast, notch lapels. Functional buttons on the sleeves. That's the way you can tell a really good suit," he said. "Tom," I objected, "you really don't need to do this for me. I feel like I'm really putting you out." "Don't be ridiculous," he countered. "I've been waiting for more than 6 months to show you a good time in Tokyo." He paused. "And you can't do that unless you're really well dressed. Now let's find you a shirt and tie." I put on some civvies and we got back into Tom's limo. This time we were going to go to a store in the shopping arcade of the Imperial Hotel. The hotel was directly across the street from the Imperial Palace. "The Emperor lives there," Tom motioned in the direction of the palace. "Frank Lloyd Wright designed this hotel," he said with an expansive wave of his hand. We went into the shopping arcade on the lower mezzanine and entered a store that had bolts of cloth in every color imaginable, and every material. Tom looked through several, held one up alongside my face, and announced, "This is the one. Off-white summer French batiste." He spoke to the proprietor, again in Japanese, and again I was measured. Then he picked out several ties that I figured would go well with a suit and shirt. Just as we got back in the limo, Tom apparently remembered something. He rattled off some more Japanese to Yuji, the driver, and Yuji went running back into the hotel. A few minutes later, he emerged with a small box. Chapter 39. July 23, 1969. We were back at Tom's apartment. "Tom," I said, "I really feel awful taking you away from your job on such short notice." "Don't be ridiculous," he countered. "I'm the boss. I can take off whenever I want." Tom looked at his watch, then called to Yuji, who had been waiting by the front door. "Yuji-san, onaka ga sukimashita. Ikimashou." Yuji made a motion halfway between a head nod and a bow. "Hai, dozo." And with that, we went back into the limo. "Have you ever had sushi?" Tom asked. "I don't think so," I responded. "I had chop suey once." Tom ignored my faux pas and said, "I think you'll like it. It's a pretty standard, casual Japanese meal." We pulled up alongside a plain shop with a cloth curtain hanging in the doorway. "This way," Tom said. Inside was a U-shaped counter ringed with bar stools. Raised about a foot above the counter was a conveyor belt, a dead ringer miniature of the conveyor belts used for luggage at airports. On the conveyor were small dishes with various small snacks, usually rice wrapped in seaweed. There were at least a dozen different variations. As the conveyor moved, the dishes made their way down the counter. Tom motioned to a bar stool and said, "Have a seat." Then he pulled up a stool next to me and sat down. "Here's the deal," he explained. "When you see something you like, you just take it off the conveyor and put it in front of you. When you finish eating, you stack up your dishes." Tom reached into a box on the counter and removed 2 sets of chopsticks wrapped in paper. He also grabbed 2 tea bags and 2 cups. He put the tea bags in the cups and turned a small faucet that discharged hot water. "Now," he said, "I'm going to teach you how to act Japanese." For the next hour, he guided me on how to use chopsticks, how to determine which sushi had sashimi, raw fish, and which had more mundane fare, and how to slurp tea. We had a great time. After lunch, we went back to Tom's apartment. "Look," he said, "I have just a few loose ends to clean up at the office, and you look like you could use a nap. I'll be back about 6, and Miyako should be back from Haneda by then, and we'll all go out. Your suit and shirt will be ready before that." I didn't object. To be honest, I was dead tired. I went to the bedroom, closed the room-darkening shades, and was asleep within minutes. In what seemed like no time, it was time to get up. "Ham," Tom was softly calling to me, trying not to wake me too suddenly. "You ready to go to town?" "I sure am," I said. I felt totally refreshed. And for the first time in over 6 months, I felt really clean. The mattress on the tatami mats had been incredibly comfortable, and my concerns about it perhaps hurting my back had been totally unfounded. When I entered the living room, the tailor was once again waiting, holding a now completed suit. But he wasn't going to leave until he was satisfied it fit perfectly. It did. The suit was absolutely gorgeous. It was a midnight blue, glimmering sharkskin appearance and fit better than anything I've ever worn, including the custom uniforms we had at the academy. The shirt was waiting on the coffee table, and I unwrapped it and tried it on. Again, perfect. Tom walked up to me, held up the ties he'd bought earlier in the day next to my suit, and pronounced, "This is the one." Then he handed me the small box that the driver had retrieved earlier. I opened it and saw 2 cufflinks with absolutely perfect matched pearls. "Tom," I objected, "I just can't let you do all this for me." "Ham," he answered, "you only come to Tokyo for the first time in your life once. I want it to be special." Just then the apartment door opened. I heard a soft-spoken female voice. "Tadaima." "Miyako is here, and she brought our lawyer from the airport," Tom remarked. A very attractive Japanese lady entered the room, walked right up to me, held out her hand, and bowed slightly. I had expected her to be wearing a kimono, but she was wearing a conservative gray dress. She had a slight accent. "I'm Miyako. Thank you for saving my husband's life." She gripped my hand with both of hers. "It's a real pleasure to meet you, Miyako. I'm not so sure I saved his life, but I'm glad I was there to help." Tom interjected. "Here comes my lawyer." A gorgeous Eurasian woman, about my age, entered the room and rushed over to Tom and hugged him. "Daddy!" Tom hugged her back, then introduced me. "Samantha, this is the Hamilton I've been telling you about." She held out her hand. "Call me Sam." I shook her hand and said, "Sam, it's a real pleasure to meet you. I'm Ham." "Sam, I'm Ham," she responded. "Sounds like we're reading a Dr. Seuss book." Tom beamed. "That's my girl, sharp as a whip. She finished at the top of her class at Harvard Law School last month. We're so proud of her." Sam appeared to blush. "Now," Tom said, "let's go have a great dinner. Do you like steak?" He didn't have to ask me a second time. While I put on my suit and tied my tie, Tom changed to an equally outstanding outfit. We all got into the car, and Tom said something in Japanese to the driver. "The absolute best steak in Tokyo is at the Misono Steakhouse in Akasaka," Tom announced. We drove through narrow streets for about a half hour and pulled up outside a small restaurant front. We went into a dimly lit, elegant restaurant and sat at a table with a large skillet built into the surface. Tom and Miyako sat on one side of the table, and Sam sat next to me, on my right. I think she purposely positioned herself there to help me with my chopsticks if I had trouble. A chef appeared with 4 thick steaks, some shrimp, an assortment of vegetables, and he proceeded to cook them in front of us. He put on an incredible performance, slicing and dicing the steaks and then tossing the pieces of meat over his head and catching them in the rice bowls in front of each of us. "This is Kobe beef," Tom explained. "Every minute of their lives, these animals are massaged and they're fed beer all day long. The meat is tender enough to cut between your chopsticks. You'll see." And by the way, he continued, from now on we're not calling them chopsticks, they're hashi. Got it, hashi, I answered. Ham went to the Air Force Academy, Tom explained, looking at Sam. Where'd you go for undergraduate? I asked Sam. I graduated from Northwestern in 1966. We ate in silence for a few minutes, with me trying my best to impress my hosts, and especially Sam, my facility with hashi. I was getting pretty good, getting almost every bite to my mouth without dropping anything. Then Sam ventured, you know, I almost dated a cadet once. Sounds like you dodged a bullet, I replied. No, I was actually really looking forward to it. In the fall of 1963, when I was a sophomore, the Army and Air Force were playing their first ever football game at Soldier Field in Chicago. I remembered it well. I was a dually at the time, and the entire cadet wing was going to travel to Chicago by train to watch the game and then have a post-game formal ball. We were going to have a joint ball with the Whoops, the West Pointers, who had also come to Chicago en masse. As a dually, I had never gotten the opportunity to leave the base since entering the academy in the summer, and this was going to be a real treat. After the game, we would have about 4 hours to be out on our own to explore Chicago before the ball. I was really looking forward to it. Then, the day before our departure, my appendix burst and I had peritonitis. I had emergency surgery and couldn't go on the trip. I was stuck at the Academy Hospital to watch the game, Air Force beat Army, on television. The only cadet in the hospital. In fact, I was the only patient in the entire hospital other than a math instructor's wife who was only there for about 3 days to deliver her baby. There was a formal ball after the game, Sam continued, and they wanted local college girls to be blind dates for the cadets. It sounded like it would be fun, and I volunteered. I bought a beautiful gown and gorgeous long white leather formal gloves and shoes, remember? She looked over at Tom and Miyako. They nodded. I showed up at the ball, and I was as dolled up as I could be. I'd gone to the hairdresser and had my hair done in the morning, and had my nails done also, and the cadets were so handsome in their mess uniforms. Is that what it's called? Mess dress, I answered. That's right, mess dress. And I'm not just saying this, Ham. I thought the Air Force cadets looked a lot sharper than the West Pointers. It goes without saying, I answered. So I went to the reception hall where all the girls were assembling, and one by one the social director called out the names of the girls, and they would go through the door to the ballroom and meet their blind dates. She paused, took a deep breath, and swallowed hard. And then I was left all alone. I didn't have a date. What? I exclaimed. Were they crazy? No, it was just the blind dates had already been prearranged, and the cadet I was supposed to be paired up with was in the hospital. I went back to my dorm room and cried myself to sleep. Tom and Miyako were staring at me. Ham, are you all right? You're white as a sheet. I found myself frozen with my chopsticks, my hashi, halfway to my mouth, and I couldn't move. Finally, I regained my composure. That was me. I was the cadet in the hospital. Now it was Sam's turn to be speechless. Tom looked at Miyako and said, "Sore wa narimasu." She nodded. Then he looked at me. I'm sorry for speaking Japanese, Ham. What I said to Miyako was that when something is meant to be, it will be. My eyes locked onto Sam's, and I remembered. That was exactly what Colonel Ryan had said.
Thanks again for listening. Subscribe now to the Ready for Takeoff podcast on iTunes or Stitcher Radio, and please rate us and post a review on the iTunes Store. For show notes, resources, and more, head over to readyfortakeoffpodcast.com.